I hadn't set foot in a military facility since the day I retired, and I'd planned to keep it that way. Years ago, my job had been to make sense of classified technologies, the kind people heard rumors about but never saw. The last mission left me disillusioned and questioning whether any of it was worth it. That's why when I got the call from Director Wells, my first reaction was to hang up. "It's not a request, Sam," he'd said. "You're the only one qualified to deal with what we're seeing here. One last time, then you're done." I told myself I could still refuse, that the whole thing could be someone else's headache. But curiosity is a tough thing to kick, and Wells knew it. So here I was, standing in the middle of a hangar at Area 51, staring at a heavy steel door, the kind that implied something worth keeping hidden. Wells was waiting on the other side, leaning against the edge of a table cluttered with files and monitors. He looked me over, probably noting the lines and greys that retirement had added. "Good to see you, Sam," he said with a tone that almost sounded sincere. "We wouldn't have called if it wasn't important." "Let's skip the formalities, Wells. Why am I here?" He nodded, straightening up. "Follow me." He led me down a narrow hallway, past security clearances and retinal scans. About a year ago, we acquired something unusual, a device that a team excavated from an old site in the Nevada desert. They were working on an unrelated project when they found it buried beneath the sand. We brought it here for study, but there's more to it than we first thought. Mills paused, choosing his words carefully. "Every 18 hours, it opens. And it doesn't open to anywhere on this Earth." I almost laughed, but Wells had the look of a man who'd stopped sleeping a while back. "What do you mean by that? Not on this Earth?" He glanced at me, and I could have sworn there was a flash of something close to fear in his eyes. "You'll see for yourself." We reached another door, this one heavily guarded. Wells motioned to the guards, and they stepped aside, allowing us through. Inside was a smaller, dark room, empty except for one object, a gate, about 10 feet high, made of stone-like material. At first glance, it looked ancient, something you might expect to see in a museum rather than a top-security military base. "When does it open?" I asked. "In 20 minutes, he replied, checking his watch. I studied the gate. Up close, it was even stranger, a rough, weathered texture, like it had spent centuries exposed to the elements. But as I looked closer, I realized it had subtle markings carved along its frame, symbols that felt vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place them. I glanced back at Wells. "What's on the other side?" "Until now, just glimpses, but enough to know it's foreign." "Foreign as in another country?" "Foreign as in another world, Sam. We're seeing landscapes and creatures that don't exist here. We've set up remote cameras to capture what we can, but the equipment struggles to keep a steady feed. Visuals go in and out, like the place itself doesn't want to be seen." Just as he finished speaking, the gate began to flicker, a low hum filling the room. I watched, unable to look away as the structure stabilized, the ancient stone solidifying. The center of the gate filled with an image, like a window opening up to somewhere else. Lush greenery stretched out on the other side, towering trees with deep blue leaves and massive fern-like plants swaying as if in a breeze. The air looked hazy, almost shimmering. My pulse quickened. "This is live?" Wells nodded. "Every 18 hours, like clockwork. We don't know where it leads, but it seems stable enough. We've done all the tests we can from this side, but the reality is, Sam, we need someone to step through." "You're kidding." "I wish I were." He held my gaze. "This is what you're here for. One trip in, recon the other side, and bring back anything you can find, anything that might explain this." I turned back to the gate, unable to shake the feeling that this was some elaborate trick, but the hum in the room was real, the way my skin prickled at the sight of that alien landscape. I felt the pull of the unknown, the reason I'd taken jobs like this in the first place. "I'll need a few things," I said, keeping my eyes on the shifting leaves and shimmering air on the other side. "We've got you covered. Temporal anchor device to keep you synced to our timeline. Biosync lenses to help you process anything foreign. Just in case. a neuro-mapping scanner to monitor any changes. They're experimental, but they should help. Experimental was code for untested. Typical. But at this point, I was already too far in to turn back. Wells glanced at his watch. The gate will stay open for 30 minutes. Then it shuts until the next window, 18 hours from now. I let the weight of that settle in. So once I'm through, I'm stuck there for a full day. That's right, 18 hours before it opens again. Wells paused, then added, "We've sent drones through to test the atmosphere. It's breathable. No need for oxygen gear, just a standard filtration mask in case of unknown particles. It's as close to Earth conditions as we could hope for." 18 hours. Longer than I'd planned, but the only way to gather meaningful intel. Wells raised an eyebrow. "Still up for it?" I nodded. I didn't come here to watch from the sidelines. He gave a slight nod, motioning to a nearby tech who started activating the gear I'd need. The temporal anchor device strapped onto my wrist felt heavier than expected, the display showing a countdown until the gate's next opening. The biosync lenses, once in, enhanced my vision, sharpening the view but subtly distorting the periphery. It would take some getting used to, but if they could keep me in sync with whatever was on the other side, I'd make do. The neuro-mapping scanner rested snugly at the base of my skull, designed to monitor for any cognitive shifts or side effects. "You're all set," Wells said, his tone clipped, though I caught the unease behind his words. "Remember, this is uncharted territory. Keep the anchor device intact. We'll be monitoring, but once you're through, it's up to you until the next window." The center of the structure took on a faint green glow that slowly sharpened into an image. I stepped closer, catching my first real look at the alien world. Thick vegetation, deep blue leaves on towering trees, and strange, massive plants that looked both familiar and unsettlingly foreign. One final glance at Wells. He nodded, and I took a breath, reaching out. The surface of the portal was warm, and as my hand crossed, I felt a prickling, like static electricity. I stepped forward, letting it pull me in fully. A rush of cold washed over me, and the world on the other side hit me in a wave of sounds and scents too rich to be earthly. The moment I crossed the threshold, the gate closed behind me. My watch ticked down from 18 hours until the next opening, a glaring reminder of the time I'd be spending here, cut off from everything familiar. I took a slow breath, the air rich and damp, almost too full, carrying hints of something sweet and metallic. The biosync lenses adjusted my vision in the dim but oddly clear atmosphere. I glanced around, taking in the alien landscape. Towering trees stretched up in dense clusters, their trunks thick and textured, each leaf a deep metallic blue that shimmered slightly. The ground was covered in thick, tangled undergrowth, ferns the size of car doors, with vines wrapped around them. And the light, though soft, seemed to come from everywhere at once, an ambient glow as if the very air was infused with it. I activated my wrist device, sinking the temporal anchor as I moved deeper into the vegetation. The display showed minor fluctuations as it adjusted to the time differential between worlds, but overall it stayed stable. So far, the equipment was holding up and the quiet around me seemed almost peaceful. Then, movement caught my eye. A large insect-like creature, scurrying across the ground. It looked almost like a trilobite, but with elongated legs that lifted its body several inches off the ground. It scuttled away into the underbrush as soon as I focused on it, vanishing with a faint rustling. My initial reaction was relief. The creature had been wary, moving away rather than toward me. Still, the familiarity of its shape was unsettling, as if I was staring at something out of Earth's distant past. I continued onward, stepping cautiously over thick roots and undergrowth, pausing every few feet to take in my surroundings. The vegetation grew denser as I moved away from the gate's location, but the biosync lenses helped adjust my vision to track movement and highlight shapes through the underbrush. I soon found a narrow animal trail, the faint depression of repeated footprints pressed into the earth. Following the path, I kept my pace slow, taking in every detail around me. Strange, bird-like calls echoed in the distance, but I saw no signs of the creatures making them. I wondered if any of the drones had picked up recordings of these sounds. The thought made me feel like an intruder, a visitor to a place I had no right to be. The idea settled into my mind, making me alert to the subtlest shifts in my surroundings. About an hour into my exploration, I noticed something unusual, a series of markings etched into a tree trunk. The patterns were rough, almost weathered by time, forming shapes that looked like symbols or language. I stepped closer, reaching up to trace one of the carvings with my finger. It felt like hardened rock rather than wood, cold to the touch. I activated my neuro-mapping scanner, the device humming slightly as it recorded the carvings. If these symbols had meaning, maybe the team back at Area 51 could decipher them. But something about them bothered me, a sense that they belonged to an intelligence that had long since disappeared. The realization that I might not be the first human or human-like being to set foot here crept into my thoughts. I moved on, still following the path, though the markings continued to show up here and there, etched into trees or the occasional rock. Each time they grew fainter, more weathered, as if they'd been left long ago and nearly erased by time. The path eventually opened up into a small clearing, and that's where I found the first true evidence of other visitors. A partial footprint in the soft soil, almost human in size and shape, but slightly elongated, with narrow toes that ended in points. Kneeling down, I examined the print closely. It was definitely human-like, but had subtle differences that made it feel alien. A chill crept up my spine. Someone had walked here before, and they weren't far off in size or shape from a human. I documented the footprint with the temporal anchor's camera, careful not to disturb it as I rose. Continuing through the clearing, I noticed that the air had taken on a slight haze. The biosync lenses adjusted to the dimming light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my own movements were slower, more sluggish. I glanced at the temporal anchor, noticing an odd reading, a slight fluctuation in the display. Time was moving differently here, maybe subtly changing pace, and I felt the weight of each second passing in a way that I'd never felt back on Earth. As I pressed further, I began to feel a faint static in my mind, like the sensation of recalling a memory I couldn't place. It wasn't an immediate threat, but the feeling lingered, casting a shadow over my thoughts as I advanced through the forest. Further ahead, I saw a set of worn-out tools, rusted and abandoned near the base of a tree, barely visible beneath a thick layer of vines and leaves. Kneeling down, I pulled back the foliage to get a closer look. They were primitive by our standards, an old metal pickaxe and a small chisel, the kind that might have been used for digging or carving. How long had they been here? Months, years, decades? The neuro-mapping scanner hummed as it recorded the tools, and I wondered if their design had any relation to the symbols I'd seen earlier. It was as if someone had been here, studying, maybe searching for something in the same way I was now. The tools made it all the more real. Someone had come here before, maybe even made a life here. I stood up, glancing around the clearing with a heightened sense of caution. The eerie quiet settled back around me, broken only by faint rustling from creatures moving in the underbrush. They were out of sight, but close enough to make their presence known. Hours passed as I ventured deeper, encountering plants and small creatures, each one familiar enough to unsettle me. I came across another print, a larger one this time, embedded in the soft soil and showing signs of something heavier pressing down. Whatever had left this one was large, possibly predatory, and it had passed through recently. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was here to explore, to document, and that fear wouldn't help. But the realization that I wasn't alone weighed on me. Even though I hadn't seen another intelligent being, the signs of previous visitors left me with a creeping unease. Whatever had been here could still be nearby, watching. Eventually, I reached a large rock formation. Carved into the face of one of the rocks were the symbols again, clearer than the others I'd seen, almost fresh. This time, they were arranged in a circular pattern, with one symbol larger and more defined than the rest. A spiral that seemed to draw my eye inward. I stepped back, taking a final look as dusk began to fall. The glow in the atmosphere was fading, and I knew I needed to set up a temporary shelter and wait out the night. 18 hours felt longer than I'd expected, especially with the knowledge that my only way back was the gate, and the possibility that the world itself might resist my return lingered in the back of my mind. As the hours crawled by, the alien world's initial wonderment faded, giving way to a tension I could feel under my skin. I kept moving, eyes scanning the undergrowth, but I felt the weight of something far larger and more intelligent observing from just out of sight. There was no doubt now. I was no longer just an explorer here. I was part of an experiment. About 4 hours in, I discovered the first human-like remains, a skull buried in a clump of dark soil. Time had worn down the bone, and there were traces of something that looked like algae spread over the surface, almost blending it with the environment. For a moment I couldn't look away, caught between horror and growing curiosity. How many had come here, only to leave pieces of themselves behind? I documented the remains, taking photos and mentally noting each detail for the report, if I ever got back to file it. As I carefully scanned the area around the skull, I noticed something scrawled on a nearby rock. Shaky, uneven letters scratched into the surface read, "They watch you dream." The message hit harder than I'd expected, lodging itself in my mind. I couldn't shake the idea that whatever intelligence was here didn't just observe passively, but actively sought a deeper connection, perhaps even with the minds of its visitors. It was as if the alien world could read me, plucking out thoughts and memories for its own dark purpose. As I moved further along the trail, I began to feel a pressure in my head, like a faint migraine, a dull throb at the back of my mind. My temporal anchor device vibrated slightly, displaying mild fluctuations. Time here seemed less stable than I'd initially realized, as if it had its own tides, pulling me in and out of sync with Earth. Each fluctuation brought with it a wave of disorientation, and I had to brace myself against a nearby tree, breathing deeply to steady my mind. Then came the whispers, blending with the rustling leaves and distant animal calls. It was like fragments of voices, snatches of sentences that I couldn't fully make out, yet familiar enough to stir memories I thought I'd buried. The voices echoed from all directions, and I knew they weren't real, but that didn't lessen the unnerving feeling they created. I activated my neuromapping scanner, hoping the data might give me some objective insight into what was happening. The device hummed softly, but after a few minutes, the screen displayed an error. Environmental interference. I cursed, the realization dawning that this world might be affecting my equipment as intentionally as it affected me. I pushed forward, trying to ignore the whispers. The trail led me to another clearing, where the vegetation grew in tangled clusters around a small stone altar. Symbols, similar to the ones I'd seen earlier, were etched deeply into its surface, and the stone felt oddly warm beneath my hand. The symbols were clearer here, intricate spirals and jagged lines that told a story I couldn't decipher. A glint of metal caught my eye, and I crouched down, pulling a partially buried canteen from the dirt. It was old, battered, and bore an insignia from what looked like a military unit. I frowned, examining the canteen, wondering how long it had been here. Its metal surface was corroded, and there was something like dried mud caked around the rim. But it was distinctly human. I saw another piece of text, scrawled haphazardly on the altar itself in a charcoal-like substance. "Don't trust the gate." The words felt more like a warning than advice, heavy with the desperation of someone who'd known they'd never return. I took a photo of the writing, my mind racing with questions. If the gate wasn't to be trusted, what did that mean for me? What had it done to the people who came before? As I stood up, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Turning, I saw creatures that looked almost human, yet twisted, malformed. They crouched in the shadows just beyond the tree line. Their eyes were too large, skin mottled with dark patches that looked almost fungal. One of them tilted its head, watching me with an expression that was disturbingly close to recognition. A sickening realization washed over me. These weren't just animals. They were humans, or had been once, transformed, adapted to this world in ways that kept them alive but took away their humanity. I stepped back, heart pounding, as they slowly retreated into the shadows, their eyes lingering on me with curiosity and despair. My temporal anchor device began flashing erratically, and my biosync lenses went blurry for a moment before snapping back into focus. The gate was somewhere back along the trail I'd come from, but with the anchor's countdown becoming more erratic, I couldn't be sure I'd make it there in time. And after seeing what those other visitors had become, I wasn't sure if the gate was even my way out. What if the gate was keeping me here on purpose, a lure that brought people in only to change them? I urged myself to move, my steps accelerating now, urgency escalating to fear. I had to get back to the gate. But with every step, the environment seemed to shift, as if the trees were subtly rearranging. It was hard to tell if I was going in circles or if this world was actively preventing me from leaving. After a while, I stumbled upon another small clearing. My heart sinking as I realized I'd seen it before. The same altar, the same symbols, as if I'd been led back. But this time, there was something new, a small metallic badge buried in the soil. I brushed off the dirt, recognizing it as a dog tag. The name was barely legible. The metal rusted, but it was enough to confirm what I'd feared. These weren't just people who had stumbled here by chance. They had been sent, perhaps from different eras, maybe even by the same organizations that had brought me here. The gate wasn't a one-way passage. It was a trap, a cycle, and each visitor was left to navigate it alone, most succumbing to the alien influence before they could find their way out. I was barely keeping it together, every sound amplified by the silence. I needed a way out, but the only path led back to the gate, back to the very thing that might be orchestrating all of this. The whispers returned, almost mocking. The familiar voices of my team, my family, and memories of people long gone taunted me, slipping in and out of my consciousness, as if testing my resolve. One final time, I steadied myself and turned back toward the direction of the gate. My anchor device's countdown was still flickering, the minutes no longer matching any sense of time I could trust. I pushed forward, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the shadowy creatures that watched from the periphery of my vision, their twisted forms half hidden in the darkness. They made no move to approach me, but instead watched, as if they were waiting for me to join them, to become part of whatever this world had turned them into. At last, I caught sight of the faint glow that marked the gate's location. My legs felt heavy and a deep fatigue had set in, but I forced myself to take each step. The gate flickered in and out, unstable, as though taunting me with the possibility of escape. Reaching out, I felt the familiar warmth of the gate's surface beneath my hand. But as I stared into the portal, doubt took root in my mind. Don't trust the gate. The words echoed, and the faces of those creatures flashed before me, each one a reminder of what could happen if I trusted the wrong path out. But what choice did I have? This place was already beginning to change me, working its way into my thoughts, wearing me down with each passing second. With a final look back at the alien world that had tried to consume me, I braced myself and stepped towards the light of the gate. I stepped through the gate, the warmth turning to an icy chill as I crossed over. The hum faded, replaced by the quiet of the hangar room back at Area 51. Relief washed over me. I was back. I turned to see Director Wells standing at the far end of the hangar, flanked by a few assistants, all in lab coats. His expression was one of cautious relief, but his eyes held a trace of something darker, like I was a stranger. The assistants were muttering among themselves, stealing quick glances at me as if I were some kind of specimen. Wells approached, but there was a restraint in his stride that I'd never seen before. "Welcome back, Sam," he said, his voice steady but lacking the warmth I'd expect. He watched me with an intensity that made me feel exposed. "Why the formalities, Wells?" He raised an eyebrow, glancing back at the assistants before looking at me. "Standard protocol after a gate mission." The assistants approached, one holding a handheld scanner that emitted a faint, high-pitched beep as it passed over me. I held still, every fibre of my being tensing up as they scanned me. The assistant frowned, exchanging a look with Wells, who gave a small nod. "We lost contact with you for a while," Wells continued. "There was concern you might not return. Most don't." I frowned. "What do you mean by most don't? How many people have been sent through that gate?" Wells hesitated, then gestured for the assistants to leave the room. Once we were alone, he leaned in. "Over the years, many have been sent. They don't come back. We assumed the gate led to hostile territory or an unstable environment, but now..." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Now I realize they may not have returned because they couldn't. You came back to us, Sam, but I don't think you came back to the right us." The full weight of his words hit me. "Are you saying this isn't my Earth?" Wells nodded slowly. "I had a suspicion the moment you stepped through. The gate isn't just a doorway. It's a bridge between alternate worlds, versions of Earth that may be nearly identical to your own, with small but defining differences." The realization felt like a punch to the gut. I looked down at my temporal anchor device, its faint error message blinking in silent confirmation. "So I came back, but to an Earth that isn't mine." Wells nodded. "And there's no guarantee you can get back to your original Earth. The gate is unpredictable. It links to a specific point in time and space, but never the same place twice in a row. That's why we lose so many people. Every gate activation may send travelers to a different alternate Earth. We only realized this too late. Some don't return, and those who do, well, they come back somewhere else." I remembered the faces I'd seen in the gate world, the twisted half-human creatures that had watched me. I swallowed hard, wondering if those were the souls who'd never made it home, or if they were versions of people like me who had gone too far into the unknown. "Is there any way to try again?" I asked, my voice strained. "To get back to my Earth?" Wells shook his head. "No guarantees. Every activation connects to a different version of Earth. You could end up on one that's far worse off than this." "Is there anyone I can talk to?" I asked. "Anyone who knew the Sam Foster from this world?" Wells sighed, nodding toward the door. "Come with me. I think there's someone who might help you understand." He led me through the hallways of the base, where more subtle differences became apparent. Familiar faces looked at me with wary recognition, as if they knew me but sensed something wrong. Eventually, we stopped at a door labeled Records. Wells tapped a code into the keypad, and the door slid open. Inside was a room filled with old files, dusty with disuse. He led me to a file cabinet, opening one of the drawers to pull out a folder labeled Foster Sam. He handed it to me with a somber expression. I opened it, scanning the documents, medical records, training reports, mission logs. They all chronicled a life nearly identical to mine, yet undeniably different. There was a photo of my alternate self, standing next to Wells, both of them younger. A tightness formed in my throat, accompanied by a creeping sense of displacement. "So, this Sam, he never came back. And now you think I've taken his place?" "More like you filled a void," Wells said quietly. "This base never fully recovered from losing you, him. Your family grieved, friends moved on. But some part of them always held out hope you'd return. Maybe they'll believe you're him. Maybe they'll know the truth." He looked at me, his eyes a mixture of sympathy and unease. "Either way, you're here now, and this world will have to adjust. But remember, Sam, this isn't your Earth. You can try to build a life here, but it will never be the same. I closed the file, feeling the weight of my own decision. My Earth, my true home, was out there somewhere, but the chances of ever reaching it were slim to none. For all I knew, I might find myself in yet another alternate Earth, a place that only resembled what I'd known. I stood in silence, staring at the file in my hands, the life of a man who was both me and not me. The gate, with its promises of discovery, had shown its true nature, an indifferent, infinite trap, pulling in people from countless realities, letting a few escape, but never to the worlds they'd left behind. The realization was sobering, a reminder that curiosity, once fed, could lead to unimaginable loss. As I walked out of the base, past people who looked at me with haunted familiarity, I understood that I'd become a stranger to my own life. This world, this Earth, wasn't mine, but it was close enough. And as the gate powered down behind me, the finality of it sunk in. There would be no going back. This world would have to be my home, even if it wasn't the one I'd left.